This is the second part of my Sony 200 to 600 zoom lens review. Well, folks, my 200 to 600 in the field hands-on review was a hit, and you guys gave me tons and tons of feedback and additional things you wanted me to look into as well. Lots of great stuff. So I spent a little bit of time putting together a couple other comparisons between the 100 to 400 and the 200 to 600 in different conditions or different aspects of both lenses, I should say. So let me review real quick the things that we're going to talk about. We're going to compare the two lenses at 200 millimeters, at 300 millimeters, and at 400 millimeters. And again, we're going to compare the two lenses in exact same focal length using the 1.4 teleconverter. In addition to that, one of the things that we're going to look at is we're going to look at how sharp the lenses are in the center versus the edges and compare the 100 to 400 to the 200 to 600. The next test that we're going to do is the minimum focusing distance. There's a big difference between these two lenses and their minimum focusing distance. So I made a couple of tests here for you guys to take a look at. And then the last thing I'm going to show you or examples of is the bokeh. I've had a number of people saying, well, that lens can't have any, decent bokeh because it's, f6.3 on the long end and whatnot. So I made one test here for you guys to see, and you can really see what the bokeh looks like. So why don't we get started? Okay, the first test I'm going to do here, as I mentioned, is 200 millimeters on both lenses. And I want to take a look at what these two lenses are doing. And here on the left, I have my 200 to 600, and on the right, I have the 100 to 400. And that's how I'm going to do all of these comparisons. I'm going to move this a little bit to actually show kind of the same part of the image on both. And it's interesting in that at 200 millimeters, that 100 to 400 absolutely does better than the 200 to 600. It does have a little more contrast. Actually, the 100 to 400 has a little more contrast throughout the range, but definitely sharper. You can see that in the detail here on these images. Okay, so now let's take a look at 300 millimeters, and waiting for this to come up. And here, I want to give a slight advantage to the 200 to 600, but they're very, very close. It's almost imperceptible, the difference between the two. So I am calling this one a draw between both lenses. Now let's take a look at 400 millimeters. And here is where the 200, 600 outpaces the 100, 400 easily. The 200 to 600 is definitely sharper than the 100, 400. Again, both of these I'm shooting wide open, which is the way that you would normally shoot these lenses. The 200 to 600 I'm shooting at f6.3, whereas the 100 to 400 I'm shooting at f5.6. Okay, our next test here is going to be both lenses at 300 millimeters with the 1.4 teleconverter. And, again, here, it's very close to one and the other. I want to give a slight edge to the 200 to 600, but very, very close. Hard to really tell that there's much of a difference between these two lenses. Especially, we look here at the center of the lens, maybe I'll give a little bit of a advantage to the 100 to 400 with the teleconverter. But the difference is so minuscule, so little. Okay, let's take a look at the next comparison here real quick. Again, we're going to go to the center. And again, here, the 200 to 600 outpaces itself and, definitely does better than the 100 to 400 millimeter. Definitely sharper. The difference is not humongous, let me tell you this, but there is a visible difference between the two. Now, from a autofocus perspective, it's a different story. right? We are talking about, I mean, both of them at this point are shooting at f8. So the autofocus, you know, from a light perspective is going to be the same, but the 100-400 does a little better in autofocusing than the 200-600 with the A7R Mark III. So that's an advantage again from that perspective, at least from the autofocus perspective, to the 100-400. Now let's take a look here at the next comparison real quick. And this is at 400 millimeters with the teleconverter. And here we gotta give it again to the 200-600. Definitely sharper edges on the image. Again, we're looking at the center of the image. So I give it now with the teleconverter to the 200-600. But here is where you're going to be, the 200-600 is going to be handicapped, because now we're talking about f9 with the 200-600, whereas with the 100-400, we're talking about f8. So you have a little bit of an advantage here. Now let's take a look at our last comparison here, which is going to be the edges of the frame. And we're going to look at both lenses, edges of the frame. I'm going to try to put those two next to each other. And in this case, I'm sorry, I do have the 100-400 on the left and the 200-600 on the right. And certainly on the edges of the frame, the 400 millimeter. And this is no teleconverter. The 100-400 at 400 millimeter does a lot better than the 200-600 at 600 millimeter. You can see that the edges of the frame actually lose out quite a bit on the 200-600. And this is why the 100-400 is a GM lens, right? Because you do have a sharp lens throughout the entire range, center and edges. However, when we go back and look at the center of the frame, the 200-600 does better than the 100-400. So certainly, you know, you have a little more consistency across the entire image with the 100-400 as far as sharpness is concerned. But you do have a sharper center in the 200-600. Now, for us wildlife photographers, we mostly care about the center of the image. Not entirely, but that's for us the most important part of the image. So having a little bit of softness in the edges is not a deal breaker. So, you know, yeah, we would prefer to see that that consistency across the entire lens, but you know, we take what we can get. I know I went through those quickly, but I wanted to keep this video nice, short, and sweet. I'm shooting this in 4K, so you can actually make sure you're looking at the video in 4K, and you can pause it and look at comparison images right here on YouTube. You should be able to tell the difference between both lenses. Now, the next comparison here, one other comment that was made on my other video is that the big advantage of the 100-400 is the minimum focusing distance. And it's actually quite different between both lenses. The 100-400, I got to look this up here. The 100-400 has a minimum focusing distance of 3.22 feet or just below 1 meter. Versus the 200-600 is 7.88 feet or 2.4 meters. You know, very, very different minimum focus distance. And why is this important? Well, because the 100-400 in a situation where you're not carrying a macro lens could be used to really get nice, tight, and close onto some of the subjects. So I'm going to show you here a couple of examples. The first example I'm going to show you here is this is a little sculpture that I have of a bananaquit, a little bird that you find in the Caribbean and in Florida. And here I'm shooting with the 100-400 at 400 millimeters with the minimum focusing distance. Now, this bird is the size of a warbler or the size of a chickadee, let's say. So they're pretty small. But with the 100-400, I'm able to get in, you know, and fill the entire frame with the 100-400. Now, when I go to the 200-600 and I'm at 600 millimeters at the minimum focusing distance, this is what I get. Substantially different. You can tell that minimum focusing distance of that 100-400 really gets you a lot closer. Now, that may not really work for birds like this because they may not tolerate you getting within 2 feet or 3 feet of them. But still, the fact that you can use this for, maybe butterflies or flowers or insects, adds to that versatility of that 100 to 400. Now, if I put the teleconverter on the 200 to 600, I get a little closer to what you get with the 100 to 400, and you still have that 7 or almost 8 feet minimum focusing distance. So this is an alternative. If you need that, if you need something to get nice and tight and close to some of your subjects, is to use the teleconverter. You certainly can use extension tubes as well, but I don't necessarily carry those out in the field all the time. I will definitely always carry my teleconverter with me. So this is one way to get almost the same frame filling capability that you get the 100 to 400 with the 200 to 600. Okay, the last thing I want to show you is the bokeh. And the bokeh is the out of focus areas in the background of the image. And a lot of us, especially wildlife photographers, we're always looking for nice, creamy, out of focus backgrounds that really make your subjects pop out. And I've gotten feedback from folks saying that the 200, 600, unfortunately, was not going to be able to get, great out of focus areas or great bokeh. So I decided to do a couple of short, quick tests here. So let's take a look. So this is 600 millimeter, close to the minimum focusing distance on the lens with some foliage behind the bird or behind the little sculpture here, about the same distance as I am from the camera, from the subject. So about the same distance between camera and subject to background. And you can see that you do have absolutely creamy, beautiful background bokeh. And if I do it with a teleconverter, get nice and close, that bokeh is still nice and beautiful and creamy. Let's compare that with the 100 to 400 at 400 millimeter. Again, very nice, creamy bokeh out of focus backgrounds. Really, really beautiful. And here is the 100 to 400 with a teleconverter. Again, super creamy, super soft, super out of focus, beautiful, beautiful bokeh. Well, I hope that this second part of my 200 to 600 review you have found useful, and that I've addressed some of the comments and questions and requests that you guys have made. I hope you really enjoyed this video. And if you did, I would really appreciate if you could share it with your friends and subscribe to my YouTube channel, and make sure to click that bell so that you get notified whenever I post new videos. Thanks a bunch. Until next time, take care.